The lightning split the sky like a jagged white scar, illuminating Grace Anderson's terrified face as her horse stumbled through the mud-slicked canyon pass, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Rain lashed against her face, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge as she urged her mare forward through the treacherous Arizona storm, the sounds of her cousins shouting somewhere behind her growing fainter with each desperate stride. Thunder rolled across the landscape like cannon fire, and she could barely see 3 feet ahead through the sheets of rain that turned the world into a gray blur of water and shadow. Her dress clung to her body, heavy with water, making every movement more difficult. The leather reins bit into her palms as she gripped them tighter, leaning forward to avoid low-hanging branches that appeared suddenly in the storm. Her mare, a chestnut named Copper, was breathing hard, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth as they pushed through terrain that was becoming increasingly dangerous. Grace knew she was being reckless, knew that riding through a storm like this in unfamiliar territory could get her killed, but the alternative was worse. Far worse. She had fled her family's ranch outside Jerome, Arizona 3 hours ago, right as the storm clouds had begun gathering on the horizon. Her cousins, Thomas and William, had made their intentions clear that morning. With her father dead these past 6 months, and her mother having passed when Grace was just a child, the ranch had passed to her. But her cousins wanted it bad enough to force her into a marriage with Thomas, the older of the two. She had overheard them planning it, talking about how once they were married, the property would effectively be his to control. The way Thomas had looked at her across the dinner table that night, with those cold, calculating eyes, had made her skin crawl. So she had run, packed what little she could fit in her saddlebags, taken her mother's silver locket and her father's pistol, and disappeared into the gathering dusk. She had thought she would make it to Prescott, where her father's lawyer resided, before they even noticed she was gone. But Thomas and William had discovered her absence within the hour and set out after her with determination that bordered on madness. The trail began to narrow, rocky walls rising on either side as the canyon deepened. Grace's breath came in short gasps, her lungs burning from the cold rain and exertion. She risked a glance over her shoulder but saw nothing except the wall of rain. Maybe she had lost them. Maybe they had given up. Maybe the storm had forced them to take shelter. She turned back around and her heart stopped. A man sat astride a black horse directly in the middle of the trail, blocking her path completely. The canyon walls were too steep here to go around, and there was no room to squeeze past. He wore a dark duster that hung heavy with rain, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, and even through the downpour she could see the rifle resting casually across his saddle. Lightning flashed again, and for a brief moment she saw his face, strong jaw, eyes that caught the light like chips of steel, weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh Arizona sun. Grace yanked hard on the reins, bringing Copper to a sliding stop just 10 feet from where he sat motionless. Her hand moved instinctively toward the pistol tucked into her belt, hidden beneath her soaked riding jacket. "Not another step," the man said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the storm. It was a deep voice, firm and commanding but not unkind. "Get out of my way," Grace shouted back, trying to keep the desperation from her voice and failing. "Please, I have to keep moving." The man did not budge. His horse, a magnificent black stallion that must have stood at least 16 hands high, remained as still as a statue. "Cannot do that, miss. This trail leads straight to a washout about a quarter-mile ahead. The creek has flooded. You go down there in this storm, you and your horse will both be swept away and drowned before you can even think to pray." "I will take my chances," Grace said through gritted teeth. She could hear something now, voices carrying on the wind. Her cousins were getting closer. "Move. Now." "No," the man said simply. "I won't have your death on my conscience. There is another way, but you are going to have to trust me." Trust. The word sounded foreign to Grace's ears. She had trusted her cousins to respect her father's wishes. She had trusted that the law would protect her rights as the sole heir. She had been wrong on both counts. "I do not know you. Why would I trust you?" The man shifted in his saddle, and Grace saw that despite the casual way he held himself, he was watching her with an intensity that suggested he was reading every detail of her appearance, cataloging every piece of information. "Because in about 2 minutes, whoever is chasing you is going to come around that bend, and you are going to be trapped here between them and a flooded canyon. I am offering you a way out. Your choice." Lightning struck somewhere close, the crack of thunder following almost immediately. Copper reared slightly, and Grace fought to control her. The voices were definitely closer now. She could almost make out words. Her mind raced through options, none of them good. If her cousins caught her, they would drag her back to the ranch, force the marriage through regardless of her protests. In 1885 Arizona, a woman's voice did not carry much weight against male relatives, especially when property was involved. "Where?" she demanded. The man turned his horse with a quick movement, gesturing to what looked like solid rock wall. "There is a break in the canyon here. Hidden trail. Follows up and over, comes out about 3 miles west. It is rough going but safer than drowning, and your friends will not find it in this storm." Grace made her decision in a heartbeat. "Lead the way." The man urged his horse forward, and Grace followed close behind. True to his word, there was a narrow split in the canyon wall, almost invisible until you were right on top of it. The opening was barely wide enough for a horse, the rock walls pressing in on both sides. Grace's knees scraped against stone as Copper pushed through, following the black stallion ahead. The sound of the rain changed, becoming more muffled as the canyon walls rose higher above them, creating a natural roof in some places. Behind them, she heard her cousins reach the main trail. Thomas was shouting her name, his voice sharp with anger. William was cursing, his words crude and threatening. Grace held her breath, pressing herself flat against Copper's neck as they moved deeper into the hidden passage. The voices echoed strangely off the rocks, making it hard to tell exactly where her cousins were, but after several long minutes, the sounds began to fade. They had continued down the main trail, missing the hidden entrance entirely. The cowboy ahead of her kept moving at a steady pace, his horse navigating the treacherous terrain with the confidence of long familiarity. They climbed steadily, the trail zigzagging back and forth as it ascended the canyon wall. Grace's legs ached from gripping the saddle, and her hands were starting to go numb from the cold and wet. But she did not complain, did not ask for a rest. She just followed the dark figure ahead of her, trusting him in a way that should have terrified her but somehow did not. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they emerged onto a flat mesa. The rain was lighter here, the storm beginning to move east. In the distance, Grace could see the lights of a small settlement, warm and inviting against the dark landscape. The cowboy pulled his horse to a stop and turned to look at her properly for the first time. "There is a ranch about a mile that direction," he said, pointing toward the lights. "My place. You can shelter there until the storm passes and those men give up looking for you." Grace studied him in the dim light. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. There was something steady about him, something that made her think of her father, a man who had always kept his word and expected others to do the same. "I do not even know your name," she said quietly. "Samuel Jackson," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Sam." "And you are Grace Anderson." Something flickered in Sam's eyes at the mention of her last name. "Henry Anderson's daughter." Grace felt her throat tighten. "You knew my father, met him a few times in Jerome. He sold me some cattle last year, good stock at a fair price. He spoke about you often, said you had your mother's spirit and his stubborn streak. I was sorry to hear about his passing." The simple words, spoken with genuine sympathy, nearly undid Grace's composure. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower, refusing to break down, refusing to show weakness. But hearing someone speak kindly of her father, acknowledge his death with respect rather than seeing it as an opportunity, made tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. "Thank you, he was a good man." "The best kind," Sam agreed. He studied her for a moment longer, then said carefully, "Those men chasing you, would they be your cousins Thomas and William Anderson?" Grace stiffened. "How did you know?" "Because I have heard talk in town about how they have been trying to get their hands on your father's ranch since he died, and because I saw the fear in your eyes when you heard them coming." His jaw tightened. "They are the reason you are running." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "There seemed little point in lying. They want to force me into marriage with Thomas so they can control the property. I heard them planning it. I had to leave." Sam's expression darkened. "That is not right. Your father left that ranch to you fair and legal." "What is right and what is legal are not always the same thing, especially for a woman alone," Grace said bitterly. "Even if I could prove their intentions, most judges would likely side with my male relatives over me. Family matters, they call it, not worth the court's time." "Maybe," Sam said slowly, "but maybe not. I know some people in Prescott who might be willing to help. Judge Morrison, for one, he is fair-minded, does not hold with forcing women into marriage against their will. But that is a discussion for tomorrow. Right now, you are half frozen and exhausted. Let us get you somewhere warm and dry." He turned his horse toward the distant lights, and Grace followed without argument. She was so tired she could barely think straight, and the adrenaline that had kept her going was rapidly fading, leaving her shaky and weak. The ranch materialized out of the gloom as they approached. A sturdy-looking house with a covered porch, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. It was modest but well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and attention to detail. Sam dismounted smoothly and moved to help Grace down from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground and his hands gripped her arms to steady her. "Easy now. You have had a rough night." "I can manage," Grace said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was she felt like she might collapse at any moment. "I am sure you can," Sam said, not unkindly, "but there is no shame in accepting help when you need it." He led her toward the house while calling out toward the barn. A moment later, a young man emerged, Mexican by appearance, probably 17 or 18 years old. Sam spoke to him in fluent Spanish, too quick for Grace to follow, and the young man nodded and moved to take care of both horses. Sam guided Grace up the porch steps and into the house. The interior was warm and dry, lit by several oil lamps that cast a golden glow over simple but comfortable furnishings. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, sending welcome heat through the room. Grace stood dripping on the wooden floor, suddenly very aware of how bedraggled she must look. "Stay here," Sam said, disappearing through a doorway. He returned a moment later with a thick blanket and what looked like a clean shirt. "The bathing room is through there. Get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. This shirt will be too big, but it is dry and warm. I will make coffee. Grace took the offered items, her fingers brushing against his. Even through her cold skin, she could feel the warmth of his hands, the calluses that spoke of hard physical labor. Thank you, Sam, truly. I do not know how I can repay you. Do not need repayment for doing the right thing, Sam said simply. Now go on, get changed. We can talk more once you are warmed up. Grace did as instructed, moving into the small bathing room and stripping off her soaked dress with trembling fingers. She used a towel she found hanging on a hook to dry off as best she could, then pulled on Sam's shirt. It fell to mid-thigh on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands until she rolled them up. It smelled faintly of soap and leather and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. She wrapped the blanket around herself for additional warmth and modesty, then ventured back out into the main room. Sam had poured 2 cups of coffee and was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. He turned when he heard her approach, and something shifted in his expression when he saw her, though it was gone too quickly for her to identify. He handed her a cup, and Grace wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. I should explain, she began, but Sam held up a hand. You do not owe me explanations, but if you want to talk, I am willing to listen. Grace found herself telling him everything, about her father's death, about how her cousins had moved into the ranch house almost immediately, claiming they were there to help her manage the property. About how she had slowly realized they had no intention of leaving, no intention of respecting her autonomy. About the overheard conversation where they had laid out their plan with chilling clarity. About her desperate decision to flee. Sam listened without interrupting, his expression growing steadily grimmer as she spoke. When she finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Your father was a smart man, he said at last. He would have known his brother's sons might try something like this. Did he leave any kind of protection for you in his will? Any conditions? Grace shook her head. He left everything to me outright. I think he trusted that they would respect his wishes, or that I would be able to hold my own. But he did not account for how determined they would be, or how willing to bend the rules. Then we make sure the rules work for you instead of against you, Sam said firmly. In the morning, I will ride to Prescott with you. We will speak to Judge Morrison, get your case in front of someone who will listen. We will also stop by the marshal's office, make a formal complaint about your cousins attempting to force you into marriage. That is illegal, even if it is not always enforced. They will say I am lying, Grace said quietly. Or overreacting, family squabbles, nothing more. Maybe, but you are not going to face them alone. I will testify to what I saw tonight, how terrified you were, how they were chasing you through a dangerous storm. That counts for something. Grace looked at him, this stranger who was offering to stand up for her when her own family had betrayed her. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Sam met her eyes, and there was something fierce and protective in his gaze. Because your father was a good man who deserved better than having his wishes trampled on by greedy relatives. Because you deserve better than being forced into a marriage you do not want. And because I cannot stand by and watch injustice happen when I have the power to stop it. The simple honesty in his words made Grace's chest tighten. She had been fighting alone for so long, had felt so isolated and helpless. Having someone on her side, someone who believed her and was willing to help without expecting anything in return, was almost overwhelming. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Do not say anything. Just drink your coffee and get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Sam set Grace up in his bedroom, insisting despite her protests that it was the only proper arrangement. He would sleep in the main room by the fire, he said, and would hear if anyone approached the house. Grace was too exhausted to argue much. She crawled into the narrow bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon cooking. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up quickly, pushing her hair out of her face, and looked around for her dress. It was hanging on a peg by the window, still damp but no longer dripping. She pulled it on over Sam's shirt, not caring how odd the combination looked, and ventured out into the main room. Sam was at the stove, tending a pan of bacon and eggs. He looked up when she entered and offered a small smile. "Morning. Hope you are hungry." "Starving," Grace admitted. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and her stomach was growling loudly. "Can I help?" "Just sit. Food will be ready in a minute." Grace sat at the small wooden table, watching Sam move around the kitchen with easy efficiency. He was dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. He was tall, probably 6 feet or just over, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who did hard physical work every day. His face had that weathered look common to men who spent most of their time outdoors, but his eyes were kind, a warm brown that made her think of honey. He served her a plate loaded with food, more than she could possibly eat, and sat down across from her with his own. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Sam spoke. "I have been thinking about the situation with your cousins. The best course is still to get your case in front of Judge Morrison, but that is going to take time. In the meantime, you need somewhere safe to stay. Somewhere they cannot reach you." "I could stay in Prescott," Grace said slowly. "Rent a room at a boarding house or hotel." "You could," Sam agreed, "but that costs money, and I am guessing you did not have time to grab much cash before you ran." Grace felt her cheeks heat. He was right. She had maybe $20 in her saddlebag, enough for a few nights' lodging but not much more, and she had no way to access the ranch accounts, not with her cousins controlling everything. "I was not thinking clearly," she admitted. "I just needed to get away." "Understandable. But here is what I am proposing. You stay here at the ranch until we get things sorted out legally. I have plenty of room, and my ranch hand Miguel and his mother Maria live in the bunkhouse, so there is a proper chaperone for propriety's sake. Maria does the cooking and laundry, and she is good company. You would be safe here, and it would not cost you anything." Grace stared at him. "I cannot possibly accept that. You have already done so much." "You can accept it, and you will," Sam said firmly. "Grace, listen to me. Your cousins are not going to give up easily. They want that ranch, and they will do whatever they think they can get away with to take it from you. You need allies, and you need a secure place to stay while we fight this battle. I am offering both. But what about your reputation? Having a woman staying here, even with Maria as chaperone, people will talk." Sam shrugged. "Let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I run an honorable household, and anyone who does not know me well enough to know that is not someone whose opinion I value." Grace wanted to argue further, but the truth was she had few other options. And something about Sam made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that reminded her of everything good about the old cowboy code her father had lived by. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept your offer, but only temporarily until I can get back on my feet, and I will work to earn my keep. I am good with horses, and I can mend tack, keep books, whatever needs doing." "Deal," Sam said, extending his hand across the table. Grace shook it, feeling the firm grip of his calloused palm against hers, and tried to ignore the little spark that seemed to jump between them at the contact. True to his word, Sam rode with Grace to Prescott that afternoon. The journey took several hours, following trails that wound through the high desert landscape. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to go on forever. Grace rode beside Sam, pointing out landmarks she recognized and listening as he talked about the ranch, his plans for expanding the herd, the challenges of running a cattle operation in Arizona territory. He had come west 5 years ago, he told her, after his family's farm in Missouri had failed. He had worked as a ranch hand for several years, saving every penny, until he had enough to buy his own small spread. It had been hard going at first, building everything from scratch with limited resources, but he had persevered. Now he ran about 200 head of cattle, enough to make a decent living without being so large that he could not manage it himself with just Miguel's help. "You ever regret leaving Missouri?" Grace asked as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. Sam considered the question. "Sometimes I miss my family. My mother especially, but this land, this life, it feels right in a way Missouri never did. Out here, you can build something with your own hands, make something of yourself based on hard work rather than which family you were born into. That appeals to me." "That is what my father loved about it too," Grace said softly. "He used to say that the West was the place where you could leave behind old mistakes and old judgments, start fresh. He came out here after my mother died, said he needed a new beginning. Sounds like a wise man. He was. I just wish he was here now to tell me what to do about Thomas and William." Sam turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think you know what he would tell you. He would tell you to fight, to not let them steal what he built for you, to stand up for yourself even when it is hard." Grace met his eyes and something passed between them, some understanding that went deeper than words. "You are right. He would say exactly that." They reached Prescott as the sun was beginning to descend toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the town's dusty streets. Prescott was the territorial capital, larger and more prosperous than Jerome, with a courthouse, several hotels, numerous saloons, and all the other establishments that came with being a center of government and commerce. Sam led them directly to the courthouse, a sturdy brick building on the main square. Judge Morrison was in his office, a silver-haired man in his 60s with sharp blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as Grace explained her situation, occasionally asking pointed questions. Sam added his observations about finding Grace fleeing through a dangerous storm, clearly terrified. When they finished, the judge sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "This is a serious accusation, Miss Anderson. Forced marriage is illegal in this territory, but proving intent can be difficult. Do you have any witnesses to support your claims about your cousin's plans?" "I overheard them myself," Grace said, "but I do not think they would have spoken so openly in front of others." "That makes it your word against theirs, which complicates matters." The judge frowned. "However, the fact that they were pursuing you through a dangerous storm suggests their intentions were not benign, and you have a legal right to refuse marriage to anyone for any reason. That much is clear." "So what can be done?" Sam asked. "I can issue an order temporarily freezing any actions related to the Anderson Ranch until a full hearing can be held. That will prevent your cousins from selling off property or making any major decisions. I can also issue a restraining order preventing them from contacting you or coming near you. But Miss Anderson, you will need to appear at the hearing to testify, and you will need evidence beyond your own word if possible. Documents, witnesses, anything that can support your case." "My father's will is filed with his lawyer, Martin Richardson. He has offices here in Prescott. The will clearly leaves everything to me with no conditions," Grace said. That is a start. I will send word to Mr. Richardson to appear at the hearing with all relevant documents. The hearing will be set for 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, where will you be staying? With me, Sam said firmly. At my ranch. She will be safe there. Judge Morrison studied Sam for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. I will have the paperwork drawn up today and sent to the Anderson ranch by tomorrow. Miss Anderson, I want you to understand that this is not a guaranteed victory. Your cousins have the right to present their side of the story, and they may have their own version of events. But I promise you will get a fair hearing in my court. That is all I can ask for, Grace said quietly. Thank you, Your Honor. They left the courthouse as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sam suggested they stay the night in Prescott and ride back to the ranch in the morning, and Grace agreed. He got them 2 rooms at a respectable hotel, insisting on paying despite Grace's protests, and they met for dinner in the hotel dining room. Over plates of roast beef and potatoes, Sam asked Grace about her plans beyond the hearing. Assuming Judge Morrison rules in your favor, what will you do? Try to run the ranch yourself? Grace had been thinking about exactly that question all day. I do not know if I can. My father taught me a lot, but running a ranch alone as a woman is nearly impossible. I would need to hire hands, and most men would not want to work for a female boss. And even if I could make it work, I am not sure I want to stay there anymore. Too many bad memories now. You could sell, Sam suggested. Take the money and start fresh somewhere else. Maybe. But it feels like giving up, like letting Thomas and William win even if they do not get the property themselves. Sam was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, there is another option. You could find a partner. Someone you trust to help you run the place. Someone who would respect your ownership and your decisions. Grace looked at him, wondering if he was suggesting what she thought he was suggesting, but his expression was neutral, giving nothing away. That would require finding someone I could trust that much. Not an easy thing. No, Sam agreed. Trust is earned, not given, but it is not impossible either. They finished their meal in thoughtful silence, and Grace retired to her room feeling emotionally exhausted. So much had happened in the past 24 hours that she could barely process it all. But lying in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, she found her thoughts kept drifting back to Sam, to the way he had appeared like an answer to a prayer in the middle of the storm, to the way he had offered help without expecting anything in return, to the warmth in his eyes and the strength in his hands. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. It was far too soon to be having these kinds of thoughts, but her heart did not seem to care about logic or proper timelines. It just knew that something had shifted inside her the moment Sam had blocked that trail and said those 3 words. Not another step. Like he was drawing a line between her and danger, making himself a wall between her and harm. The next morning, they rode back to the ranch through country that seemed less threatening in daylight. Grace found herself relaxing as they traveled, the tension that had been coiled tight in her chest slowly unwinding. Sam pointed out various features of the landscape, telling her stories about the area, making her laugh with tales of his early misadventures as a new rancher. When they arrived back at the ranch, Maria was there to greet them. She was a round, warm woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a quick smile. She fussed over Grace immediately, insisting she must be exhausted and hungry, ushering her into the house while rapid-firing questions in accented English. Sam just grinned and took care of the horses, leaving Grace in Maria's capable hands. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace settled into a routine at the ranch. She helped with the horses, as she had promised, proving herself to be an excellent rider and skilled at working with difficult animals. She assisted Maria with cooking and cleaning, despite the older woman's protests that she was a guest. She rode out with Sam and Miguel to check on the cattle, learning the boundaries of his property and the rhythms of ranch life. And slowly, day by day, she felt herself coming back to life. Living in the same house as Sam, even with Maria's constant presence as chaperone, created an intimacy that Grace had not anticipated. She learned that he took his coffee black and strong, that he read books in the evening, everything from dime novels to serious literature, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a longhorn that had charged him 2 years ago, that he whistled tunelessly when he was working on a project that required concentration, that he was unfailingly gentle with animals and respectful with people, regardless of their station. And she began to realize she was falling in love with him. It was not a sudden revelation but a gradual understanding, like watching the sun rise slowly over the desert. The way her heart lifted when she heard his voice in the morning. The way she found excuses to work near wherever he was working. The way she caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the easy strength with which he moved, the quiet confidence he carried. The way she felt safe around him in a way she had never felt safe with anyone except her father. She thought perhaps he might feel something too. She caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. He found reasons to touch her hand when passing her things. He always made sure she had the most comfortable chair by the fire in the evening. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, actually listening to her answers and taking them seriously. But he never said anything directly, never crossed any lines of propriety, and Grace was too uncertain to make the first move. The day of the hearing arrived faster than Grace expected. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the dark blue one she had packed when fleeing, and tried to calm her racing heart. Sam drove them to Prescott in a wagon, with Maria coming along for support. The courthouse was crowded when they arrived, and Grace was dismayed to see Thomas and William already there, both dressed in suits and looking confident. Thomas caught sight of her and started forward, but Sam stepped smoothly between them, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Not threatening exactly but making his presence known, Thomas stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Grace, this is ridiculous," Thomas called past Sam. "Come home, we can work this out." "I have nothing to say to you," Grace replied, keeping her voice steady. "You will hear my position in court." The hearing itself was intense and exhausting. Thomas and William presented themselves as concerned relatives who only wanted to help their poor orphaned cousin manage her inheritance. They claimed Grace had misunderstood their intentions, that they had never mentioned forcing her into marriage, that she had run away in an emotional state after having an argument with Thomas about some minor household matter. They produced character witnesses who testified that Thomas was an upstanding member of the community, a regular churchgoer, a man of good reputation. Then it was Grace's turn. She told her story clearly and calmly, walking through the series of events that had led to her overhearing their plans and her subsequent flight. Sam testified about the conditions in which he had found her, fleeing in terror through a dangerous storm. Martin Richardson, her father's lawyer, presented the will and testified that Henry Anderson had been very clear about wanting his daughter to inherit everything with no strings attached. He also produced a letter Henry had written to him shortly before his death, expressing concerns about his nephew's interest in the property and instructing Richardson to ensure Grace's rights were protected. Judge Morrison listened to everything with his impassive expression, asking occasional questions. When both sides had finished presenting their cases, he announced he would take a short recess to review the evidence and render his decision. Those 30 minutes felt like an eternity to Grace. She sat in the hallway with Sam beside her, his presence steadying her even though neither of them spoke much. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison looked stern as he surveyed the room. "This court has carefully considered all evidence and testimony presented," he began. "It is clear to me that Henry Anderson intended for his daughter to inherit his property outright, with no conditions or limitations. It is also clear that Miss Anderson had legitimate reasons to fear her cousin's intentions, regardless of whether those intentions included forced marriage, as she alleges. The fact that Thomas and William Anderson pursued her through dangerous conditions suggests their interest in controlling her and her property exceeded the bounds of reasonable family concern." Grace felt her heart beginning to race with hope. "Therefore, this court rules that Grace Anderson is the sole legal owner of the Anderson Ranch and all associated property, with full rights to manage, sell, or otherwise dispose of said property as she sees fit. Thomas and William Anderson are hereby ordered to vacate the property within 7 days and to have no further contact with Grace Anderson unless she explicitly requests such contact. The restraining order previously issued is made permanent. Any violation will result in criminal charges." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and Grace felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Sam's hand found hers and squeezed gently. Maria was openly crying, embracing Grace as soon as they exited the courtroom. Thomas and William looked furious, but there was nothing they could do. The law had finally worked in Grace's favor. As they prepared to leave Prescott, Thomas made one last attempt, catching Grace alone for a moment outside the courthouse. "You are making a mistake," he said, his voice low and angry. "You cannot run that ranch alone. You will fail within a year and lose everything." Grace looked at him steadily, all fear gone. "That is my decision to make, not yours, and maybe I will not be alone. Either way, it is no longer your concern." She walked past him without another word, moving to where Sam was waiting with the wagon. The ride back to the ranch was celebratory, with Maria chattering excitedly about how justice had been served and how proud Henry would have been of his daughter. But Grace was quiet, thinking about what came next. When they arrived back at Sam's ranch, Grace asked if she could speak with him privately. They walked out to the corral, watching the horses graze in the evening light. "I need to go back to my father's ranch," Grace said quietly. "Make sure Thomas and William actually leave, assess what condition they have left things in, figure out what I am going to do next." "I will go with you," Sam said immediately. "Make sure there is no trouble." "Thank you, but Sam, there is something else I need to say." Grace took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "These past 2 weeks, staying here, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You saved my life that night in the storm, but you have done so much more than that. You have given me back my confidence, my belief that there are still good people in this world. You have treated me with respect and kindness and have asked for nothing in return." Sam was watching her intently, and Grace forced herself to continue. "I have fallen in love with you, Sam Jackson. I know it is fast. I know it might seem foolish, but it is the truth. And I needed you to know that before I left, even if you do not feel the same way." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Sam did not respond. Then he smiled, that slow, warm smile that made her heart flutter, and stepped closer. "Grace Anderson, I have been half in love with you since I saw you riding through that storm with fire in your eyes, refusing to give up even when everything was against you. And I have been falling deeper every single day since. I did not say anything because I did not want you to feel obligated, did not want you to think you owed me anything for helping you." "I do not feel obligated," Grace said, her voice trembling. I feel grateful and amazed and terrified and hopeful all at once." Sam reached up and cupped her face gently in his hands. "Then I should probably tell you that I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love someone this quickly. And if you will have me, I would like to spend the rest of my life proving to you that love can be built on respect and partnership, and equals choosing each other freely." Grace rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her emotions into that single contact. Sam's arms came around her, holding her close, and for a long, perfect moment, nothing else existed except the two of them and the love that had bloomed between them in such an unlikely situation. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "So what happens now?" Sam asked softly. "Now we go to my father's ranch and make sure those worthless cousins of mine actually leave," Grace said firmly. "And then we figure out our future together. Maybe we combine the ranches, run them as one operation. Maybe we sell mine and build something new here. I do not know yet. But whatever we decide it together, as partners." "As partners," Sam agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The next day, Sam, Grace, and Miguel rode over to the Anderson ranch. Grace's heart clenched as they approached the property she had grown up on, seeing it with new eyes after her time away. Thomas and William were indeed packing, loading a wagon with their belongings. They glared at Grace but did not speak, clearly aware that Sam and Miguel were present and ready to intervene if they tried anything. Grace walked through the house, seeing the damage her cousins had done in their occupation. Nothing catastrophic, but small signs of disrespect. Her mother's china had been used carelessly, several pieces chipped or broken. Her father's papers had been rifled through and left in disarray. Her own bedroom had been converted into storage space for Thomas's things. But it was all fixable, all salvageable. By evening, Thomas and William were gone, and Grace stood on the porch of her father's house with Sam beside her, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I think I want to keep this place," she said quietly. "Not to live in, at least not right away. But to preserve it, honor my father's memory. Maybe we run both ranches, hire some good hands to manage the daily operations here while we live at your place. Build something bigger than either property alone could be." "Sounds like a solid plan," Sam said. "But there is one thing we should probably address first." "What is that?" Sam turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Grace Anderson, I know this is fast by most people's standards. We have known each other less than a month. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Grace felt joy bubble up inside her, so intense it was almost overwhelming. "Yes, absolutely yes." Sam pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly, right there on the porch where anyone passing by could see. Grace did not care. Let them see. Let the whole territory know that she had found something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. They were married 3 weeks later in Prescott, with Judge Morrison himself presiding. Maria cried throughout the entire ceremony, and Miguel served as Sam's best man. Martin Richardson gave Grace away, standing in as the closest thing to family she had left. Grace wore her mother's lace veil, the one piece of her mother's that had survived all these years, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Sam wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise for the future they would build together. The reception was held at the hotel dining room, with half the town turning out to celebrate. People who had heard about Grace's legal battle came to congratulate her on her victory and wish the couple well. It was more celebration than Grace had ever imagined having, given how recently she had been alone and running for her life. As the evening wound down and they retired to their hotel room, Grace felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not experienced since before her father's death. She was no longer alone. She had a partner, an equal, someone who loved her for exactly who she was and wanted nothing more than to build a life together. Sam pulled her close as they lay in the darkness, his hand stroking her hair gently. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How strange life is," Grace replied. "A month ago I was running for my life through a storm, terrified and alone. And now I am married to the best man I have ever known with a future full of possibilities ahead of me. If you had not been on that trail that night, if you had not stopped me from riding into danger, none of this would have happened." "I think we would have found each other eventually," Sam said. "Some things are meant to be." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. I think you were meant to ride down that trail, and I was meant to be there waiting." "Not another step," I said, "and you trusted me enough to listen. Everything that has happened since has just been us choosing each other over and over again." Grace turned in his arms to face him, seeing the love in his eyes even in the dim light. "Then I choose you, Sam Jackson, today and every day for the rest of our lives." "And I choose you, Grace Jackson," Sam replied, kissing her forehead. "Forever." They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, talking about their dreams and plans, making promises and sharing hopes. When they finally fell asleep, it was with smiles on both their faces. The weeks and months that followed were busy ones. True to their plan, they combined the operations of both ranches, hiring 2 experienced hands to manage the Anderson property while they focused on expanding Sam's operation. Grace proved herself to be an excellent businesswoman, with a head for numbers and a talent for negotiating fair prices. Together, they built the combined operation into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Maria was overjoyed to have Grace as a permanent member of the household, treating her like the daughter she had never had. Miguel flourished under Sam's mentoring, developing into a skilled cattleman in his own right. The ranch became known as a good place to work, where hands were treated fairly and paid honestly, and where a woman's voice carried equal weight to a man's in decisions. Grace kept her father's house maintained and eventually turned it into housing for married ranch hands, ensuring it remained a home rather than falling into disrepair. She visited his grave regularly, telling him about her life, about Sam, about how she had fought for what he had built and won. She liked to think he would have been proud. 18 months after their wedding, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Sam's reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy mixed with protective concern, excitement tempered with nervousness about becoming a father. He fussed over her constantly as her pregnancy progressed, driving her slightly crazy, but also making her feel cherished and loved. Their son was born on a clear spring morning in 1887, a healthy baby boy with Sam's dark hair and Grace's green eyes. They named him Henry after Grace's father, and he was doted on by everyone on the ranch. Maria declared him the most beautiful baby ever born, and Miguel carved him a wooden horse that became a treasured toy. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, red-haired and fierce even as an infant. They named her Elizabeth, after Sam's mother, and she immediately wrapped her father around her tiny finger. Watching Sam with their children, seeing his patience and gentleness, his willingness to get down on the floor and play, his involvement in every aspect of their care, made Grace fall in love with him all over again. One evening when the children were 5 and 3, Grace and Sam sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. Henry was playing in the yard with the wooden horse Miguel had made him, making galloping sounds. Elizabeth was in Sam's lap, already fighting sleep but refusing to admit it. "Do you ever think about that night?" Grace asked quietly. "The storm, how we met, all the time," Sam admitted. "Best storm of my life." Grace laughed softly. "I was so scared. And then there you were, this stubborn cowboy blocking my path, refusing to let me ride into danger." "Not another step," I said. "And you listened, even though you had every reason not to trust me." "I listened because something in my heart recognized you," Grace said. "Recognized that you were exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it yet." Sam shifted Elizabeth in his arms, pressing a kiss to Grace's temple. "We have built something good here, haven't we?" Grace looked around at the ranch they had built together, at the home they had made, at the children they were raising to be strong and kind and fair, at the life they had created from that single moment of trust in a storm. "We have built something extraordinary," she agreed. "And it all started because you were brave enough to block my path, and I was brave enough to follow you." "Then here is to blocked paths and brave hearts," Sam said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "To blocked paths and brave hearts," Grace echoed, clinking her cup against his. "And to love that grows from trust and respect and two people choosing each other every single day." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grace felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been running from danger that stormy night, desperate and afraid. But she had run straight into the arms of the man who would become her partner, her equal, her home. She had found love in the most unlikely circumstances, built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. And it had all started with those three simple words: not another step. Years passed, and the Jackson Ranch continued to prosper. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his grandfather had, who treated animals and people with equal respect. Elizabeth became a fierce defender of justice, reminding everyone constantly of her mother's fight to keep what was rightfully hers. They eventually had a third child, another boy they named Samuel after his father, who inherited his parents' stubborn determination and his grandfather Henry's business sense. Grace and Sam grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges, as all couples do: droughts that threatened the herds, economic downturns that made money tight, the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But they faced everything together, as partners, never forgetting the foundation of trust and respect on which their relationship was built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together friends and neighbors from throughout the territory. Judge Morrison, now quite elderly, attended and gave a speech about how he had seen many cases in his years on the bench, but few had given him as much satisfaction as helping Grace Anderson claim what was rightfully hers. Martin Richardson, also grayed with age, toasted to Henry Anderson's wisdom in raising a daughter who would fight for what she believed in. As the party wound down and guests began departing, Grace and Sam slipped away to their porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. They sat in the rocking chairs Sam had made for their 10th anniversary, holding hands and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. 25 years, Grace said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I rode through that storm. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago. Both are true, Sam said. We have lived a whole life together in these 25 years. Built a ranch, raised children, created something that will outlast us both. But I can still remember exactly what you looked like that night, soaking wet and defiant, refusing to let anything stop you. And I remember how steady you were, how calm. You did not try to control me or force me to do what you thought was best. You just offered information and let me make my own choice. That is what love should be, Sam said. Offering guidance and support, but respecting that your partner is a whole, complete person capable of making their own decisions. That is what your father understood, and that is what I have tried to honor every day of our marriage. Grace squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained even as they both grew older. You have honored it perfectly. You have been my partner in every sense of the word. We have built this life together, truly together, and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the terrifying flight through the storm, Sam teased gently. Especially not that, Grace said firmly, because that storm brought me to you, and you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through the grass, an owl hooting somewhere nearby. Inside the house, they could hear their children cleaning up from the party, laughing together, and Grace felt her heart swell with contentment. I want you to know something, Sam said eventually. If I had to live my life over again, if I could change anything, I would not. I would make every choice exactly the same because they all led me here, to this moment, to this life with you. So would I, Grace whispered. Every single choice, every moment of fear and doubt and struggle, it was all worth it to end up here with you. Sam stood and pulled Grace to her feet, taking her in his arms and swaying gently as if to music only they could hear. They danced there on the porch under the emerging stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. When they finally went inside, it was hand in hand as they did everything. Partners, equals, two people who had chosen each other in a storm and kept choosing each other every day since. Grace lived to see all three of her children grown and married, watched grandchildren arrive and fill the ranch with laughter and chaos. She saw Henry take over management of the combined ranches, watched him apply the lessons his parents had taught him about fairness and respect. She saw Elizabeth become a vocal advocate for women's property rights, traveling throughout the territory to speak about her mother's case and fight for legal reforms. She saw young Samuel develop a talent for breeding horses, building that aspect of the ranch into something special. When Grace was 72 years old, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Sam holding her hand just as he had held it on their wedding night nearly 50 years earlier. The funeral brought together people from all over Arizona territory, all wanting to pay respects to a woman who had fought for what was right and won, who had built a legacy of fairness and partnership that extended far beyond her own life. Sam lived another 3 years after Grace's death, long enough to see the territory become a state, long enough to ensure their children were settled and secure. On the day he died, he was found sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, looking out over the land he and Grace had built together, a peaceful smile on his face. In his lap was an old photograph from their wedding day, Grace in her mother's veil and Sam in his uncomfortable suit, both looking at each other with such love it was almost tangible. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree that Sam had planted the year they married. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates and the words partners in life and love. But those who knew them said that description captured everything important about Samuel and Grace Jackson. Their story became legend in the family, passed down through generations. The tale of how Grace had fled through a storm, how Sam had blocked the trail and said, "Not another step." How trust had bloomed into love and love had built into something enduring. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would ask to hear the story again and again, never tiring of the romance and adventure of it all. And on stormy nights, when rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the Arizona landscape, the Jackson family would look out into the darkness and remember. Remember that sometimes the storms we run through lead us exactly where we need to be. Remember that love built on trust and respect can weather anything. Remember that the best partnerships are between equals who choose each other freely, every single day. The ranch continued for generations, managed by Jackson descendants who honored the legacy of fairness and partnership that Sam and Grace had established. The story of their meeting was never forgotten, passed down as a reminder that sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen when we are running from something, and someone brave enough blocks our path and offers us a different way forward, not another step into danger. Not another step alone, but instead, a step together towards something better, something lasting, something that would endure long after the storm had passed, and the sun emerged once more to illuminate all they had built together.